The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Colonel Sarah Martinez stepped out of her black sedan. Her crisp uniform bore the insignia of her new rank, earned through 15 years of dedicated service and countless missions in hostile territories. Today marked the beginning of her most challenging assignment yet, taking command of Fort Blackwater, a base known for its rigid traditions and resistance to change. As she approached the main entrance, Sarah noticed the curious stares from soldiers going about their morning routines. Word had spread quickly through the base about their new commanding officer, and she could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their eyes. Fort Blackwater had been under male leadership for over 50 years, and many of the veteran soldiers weren't sure what to expect from this change. The guard at the main gate, Sergeant Thompson, was a 20-year veteran with graying temples and deep-set eyes that had seen too many battles. He stood at attention as Sarah approached, but there was something in his posture that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. When Sarah presented her identification and transfer orders, Thompson examined them with unusual scrutiny. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty, "I'm going to need to verify these orders with the base administrator before I can allow entry." Sarah raised an eyebrow. This was highly irregular. Commanding officers didn't typically need special verification to enter their own base. She maintained her composure, understanding that change often came with resistance, especially in military environments where tradition ran deep. "Sergeant, these orders are signed by General Harrison himself," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm Colonel Martinez, your new commanding officer. I believe there might be some confusion." Thompson's face reddened slightly as he realized the awkwardness of his position. He had heard rumors about the new CO being a woman, but seeing her in person made it real in a way that caught him off guard. The base had operated under traditional protocols for so long that the idea of a female commanding officer seemed almost foreign. "With all due respect, Colonel," Thompson said, struggling to find the right words, "we weren't expecting, that is to say, the briefing we received was somewhat unclear about." Sarah understood immediately. The transition briefings had probably focused on her credentials and experience rather than addressing the historic nature of her appointment. Many of the soldiers had likely formed their own assumptions about what their new commander would look like. Meanwhile, a small crowd had begun to gather near the entrance. Soldiers who had been heading to morning formation paused to witness the unusual scene unfolding at the gate. Some whispered among themselves, while others watched with genuine curiosity about how this situation would resolve itself. Captain Rodriguez, the base executive officer, had been watching from his office window when he noticed the commotion. He quickly made his way to the gate, knowing that any delay in the new commander's arrival could create unnecessary tension throughout the base. "Sergeant Thompson," Rodriguez called out as he approached, "what seems to be the issue here?" "Sir, this officer claims to be our new commanding officer, but I was told to expect Colonel Martinez," Thompson replied, still holding Sarah's identification documents. Rodriguez looked at Sarah and immediately recognized her from the photos that had been circulated among the senior staff. He had been one of the few who had actually seen her personnel file and understood the significance of her appointment. "Sergeant, this is Colonel Martinez," Rodriguez said firmly. "Please return her credentials and render the appropriate honors." Thompson's face went pale as he realized his mistake. He quickly handed back Sarah's documents and snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute. "My apologies, Colonel. Welcome to Fort Blackwater." Sarah returned the salute and nodded politely. "Thank you, Sergeant. I understand that change can be surprising, but I look forward to working with all of you." As they walked toward the administrative building, Rodriguez felt compelled to explain the situation. "Colonel, I apologize for that incident. The notification about your arrival may not have been as comprehensive as it should have been." Sarah smiled slightly. She had encountered similar situations before, though perhaps not quite as direct as Thompson's reaction. "Captain, I appreciate your intervention, but I don't take it personally. Change requires adjustment time for everyone." The administrative building buzzed with activity as word of the new commander's arrival spread through the base. Soldiers and civilian staff members found reasons to walk past the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who would now be leading them. In the conference room where Sarah was scheduled to meet with the senior staff, there was a palpable tension. The officers had heard about Thompson's reaction at the gate, and many were wondering how they should respond to their new commander. Some had served under female officers before, but never as the ultimate authority on base. Major Collins, the operations officer, had served at Fort Blackwater for 8 years and was known for his straightforward approach to military protocol. He had reservations about the appointment, not because of Sarah's gender, but because he believed that such a traditional base required a commander who understood its unique culture and history. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, the senior medical officer, had a different perspective. She had broken barriers herself as one of the few women in senior medical positions within the military, and she was curious to see how Sarah would handle the challenges that came with command. When Sarah entered the conference room, the officers stood at attention. She took her place at the head of the table and gestured for them to be seated. The room was quiet except for the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and the distant noise of military vehicles outside. "I know this is a significant change for Fort Blackwater," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "I've read the reports about this base's outstanding service record and the dedication of its personnel. My goal is not to disrupt what works well, but to build upon the foundation that has already been established." Major Collins leaned forward slightly. "Colonel, if I may ask, what experience do you have with bases like Fort Blackwater? We operate under some very specific protocols here." It was a fair question, and Sarah had expected it. "Major, I've commanded 2 forward operating bases in Afghanistan and served as executive officer at Fort Carson for 3 years. While every base has its unique characteristics, the fundamentals of leadership and military excellence remain constant." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah answering questions about her background, her command philosophy, and her plans for the base. She could see that some officers were warming to her presence, while others remained cautious and observant. As the meeting concluded, Sarah stood and looked around the table. "I want each of you to know that my door is always open. If you have concerns, suggestions, or simply need clarification on anything, please don't hesitate to approach me. We're a team, and teams succeed when they communicate effectively." The officers filed out of the room, some stopping briefly to welcome her officially to Fort Blackwater. Sarah remained behind for a moment, looking out the window at the base that was now her responsibility. She could see soldiers moving between buildings, vehicles traveling along the main road, and the American flag waving in the morning breeze. Captain Rodriguez returned to the conference room with a stack of files and reports. "Colonel, these are the weekly status reports from each department. I thought you might want to review them before your tour of the facilities." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah replied, accepting the documents. "I'd also like to schedule individual meetings with each department head over the next week. I want to understand how each unit operates and what challenges they're facing." As Rodriguez made notes about the requested meetings, Sarah began reviewing the files. The base was clearly well run, with strong performance metrics across all areas. However, she noticed several comments in the reports about maintaining traditional standards and preserving base heritage. These phrases suggested that there might be some underlying resistance to change, which could pose challenges as she implemented her leadership style. Sarah had learned from previous assignments that successful command required finding the right balance between respecting established traditions and making necessary improvements. Later that morning, Sarah began her tour of the base facilities. Her first stop was the motor pool, where Sergeant Major Williams supervised a team of mechanics working on various military vehicles. Williams was a 30-year veteran who had earned respect throughout the base for his technical expertise and no-nonsense approach to maintenance operations. When Sarah and Rodriguez arrived at the motor pool, Williams approached them with oil-stained hands and a cautious expression. He had heard about the morning's incident at the gate and was curious about this new commander who had caused such a stir. "Sergeant Major Williams," Rodriguez announced, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Martinez, our new commanding officer." Williams saluted and studied Sarah carefully. "Colonel, welcome to Fort Blackwater. We run a tight operation here, and our readiness rates are among the best in the division." Sarah returned the salute and smiled. "I've seen the reports, Sergeant Major. Your department's performance is impressive. I'd like to learn more about how you maintain such high standards. For the next 20 minutes, Williams gave Sarah a detailed tour of the motor pool, explaining their maintenance procedures, equipment inventory, and training programs. As they talked, Sarah asked thoughtful questions about operational challenges and potential improvements. Williams found himself surprised by Sarah's technical knowledge and genuine interest in the details of his operation. By the end of the tour, his initial skepticism had transformed into cautious optimism about working under her command. The pattern repeated itself throughout the morning as Sarah visited the communications center, the medical facility, and the training grounds. At each location, she encountered initial uncertainty from the personnel, followed by growing respect as they witnessed her professionalism and expertise. At the communications center, Technical Sergeant Lopez initially seemed nervous about briefing a female commanding officer on the base's secure communication protocols. However, Sarah's questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of communication systems that impressed the entire staff. The medical facility presented a different dynamic, as Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was eager to discuss the challenges of providing healthcare services in a military environment. Their conversation touched on everything from routine medical care to emergency response procedures, and Sarah's thoughtful responses earned Barnes's immediate respect. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the base that their new commanding officer was not what many had expected, but was proving to be knowledgeable, approachable, and genuinely interested in understanding their operations. In the mess hall, Sarah chose to eat with the enlisted personnel rather than in the officers' dining room. This decision surprised many of the soldiers, who had become accustomed to commanders who maintained strict separation between ranks during meal times. As Sarah moved through the serving line, conversations around her became quieter, with soldiers stealing glances and whispering among themselves. She selected a table near the center of the dining area and was soon approached by several curious soldiers. "Colonel," said Private Johnson, a young soldier who had arrived at Fort Blackwater just 6 months earlier, "is it true that you served in Afghanistan?" Sarah nodded while taking a bite of her meal. "I did 2 deployments there. It was challenging but rewarding work." The conversation gradually expanded to include other soldiers at nearby tables, with Sarah answering questions about her military career and sharing stories from her various assignments. She was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries while still connecting with the troops on a human level. Corporal Stevens, who had been at Fort Blackwater for 3 years, asked about Sarah's plans for the base. "Colonel, are you planning to make a lot of changes around here? Some of the guys are worried about that." Sarah appreciated the directness of the question. "Corporal, I believe in making improvements where they're needed, but I also believe in respecting what works well. Before I make any significant changes, I want to understand how things operate here and why certain procedures exist." This response seemed to ease some of the tension in the room, and several soldiers nodded approvingly. The fact that their new commander was taking time to listen rather than immediately implementing changes suggested that she understood the importance of the base's established culture. As lunch concluded, Sarah noticed that many of the soldiers who had initially seemed wary were now engaging in normal conversation around her. The ice was beginning to break, though she knew that earning their complete trust would take time and consistent demonstration of effective leadership. 3 weeks into her command, Sarah faced her first major crisis. Intelligence reports indicated suspicious activity near the base perimeter, and she had to make critical decisions about security protocols while still proving herself to skeptical subordinates. The situation began on a Tuesday evening when Sergeant Rodriguez, the night watch supervisor, noticed unusual movement on the thermal sensors positioned around the base's eastern boundary. The area was known for occasional wildlife activity, but these readings suggested something different: coordinated movement patterns that didn't match animal behavior. Rodriguez immediately contacted the command center and requested permission to investigate with a patrol team. The duty officer, Lieutenant Williams, authorized a reconnaissance mission and notified Sarah of the developing situation. When Sarah arrived at the command center 20 minutes later, she found a room buzzing with activity. Multiple screens displayed thermal imaging, satellite feeds, and communication logs from nearby military installations. The evidence suggested they were dealing with either sophisticated poachers or potentially hostile reconnaissance. "What's our current assessment?" Sarah asked as she reviewed the incoming data. Lieutenant Williams briefed her on the timeline of events and the resources currently deployed. "Colonel, we have a 4-man patrol team investigating the perimeter breach. They're reporting evidence of human activity, including footprints and what appears to be surveillance equipment." Sarah studied the tactical display showing the patrol's position relative to the suspected intrusion site. The eastern boundary bordered a dense forest area that provided excellent cover for anyone attempting to observe base operations. If this was hostile reconnaissance, it represented a serious security threat. Major Collins arrived shortly after Sarah, having been summoned from his quarters. As the operations officer, he was responsible for coordinating the base's response to security incidents. However, he had reservations about following orders from a commander he still considered unproven in crisis situations. "Colonel," Collins said as he reviewed the situation reports, "I recommend we contact division headquarters and request additional security support. This type of incident requires experienced handling." Sarah understood Collins's concern but disagreed with his assessment. "Major, our personnel are well trained for this type of situation. Let's see what the patrol discovers before escalating to division level." The disagreement created tension in the command center, with several staff members uncertain about whose judgment to trust. Collins had been at Fort Blackwater for 8 years and was known for his cautious approach to security matters. Sarah was still proving herself as a commander, despite her impressive credentials. Captain Martinez, the intelligence officer, provided additional context about recent activities in the region. "We've had reports of increased smuggling operations along the border, approximately 30 miles from our location. It's possible that criminal organizations are using our area as a transit route." This information added another layer of complexity to the situation. If they were dealing with criminal activity rather than military threats, the appropriate response protocols would be different. Sarah needed to make decisions based on incomplete information while maintaining the confidence of her staff. The patrol team's next report changed everything. Sergeant Peterson, the team leader, radioed that they had discovered a sophisticated listening post hidden in the forest. The equipment was military grade and appeared to have been monitoring base communications for an extended period. "Command, we're looking at professional level surveillance gear," Peterson reported. "This isn't random criminal activity. Someone has been watching our operations." Sarah felt the weight of command as she processed this information. The discovery of surveillance equipment suggested a deliberate intelligence operation targeting Fort Blackwater. Her response would need to balance security concerns with the need to maintain normal base operations. Major Collins stepped forward with a more urgent recommendation. "Colonel, this confirms my assessment that we need division support. We're potentially dealing with foreign intelligence operatives." Several staff members nodded in agreement with Collins's assessment, creating pressure for Sarah to follow his recommendation. However, she had dealt with similar situations during her overseas deployments and believed that immediate escalation might compromise their ability to gather intelligence about the perpetrators. "Major, I want to establish a security perimeter around the discovery site and begin counter-surveillance operations," Sarah decided. "We need to understand the scope of this operation before involving higher headquarters." The command center fell silent as staff members absorbed her decision. Some appeared supportive, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Collins's expression suggested strong disagreement, but military protocol required him to follow orders despite his reservations. Over the next several hours, Sarah coordinated a complex operation involving multiple units from the base. Security teams established monitoring positions around the surveillance site, communications specialists worked to trace electronic signatures from the discovered equipment, and intelligence personnel analyzed the potential implications of the security breach. Captain Rodriguez proved instrumental in implementing Sarah's strategy, demonstrating enthusiasm for her methodical approach to the crisis. His support helped convince other officers that their new commander had the situation under control. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes offered medical support personnel for the operation, expressing confidence in Sarah's handling of the crisis. "Colonel, your approach reminds me of procedures we used during joint operations overseas. You're thinking several steps ahead." As dawn broke, the base's investigation had yielded significant results. The surveillance equipment was traced to a criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, and intelligence indicated that they were monitoring military communications to avoid detection during their operations. Sarah called a staff meeting to discuss the findings and plan their next steps. The conference room was filled with officers who had worked through the night to support the operation, and there was a noticeable shift in their attitude toward their commanding officer. Based on our investigation, Sarah began, we're dealing with criminal surveillance rather than foreign intelligence. The perpetrators were using our communication patterns to plan smuggling routes that avoided military patrol areas. Major Collins listened carefully as Sarah outlined the evidence supporting this conclusion. While he still believed that involving division headquarters would have been appropriate, he had to admit that her approach had produced valuable intelligence. "What's our next step, Colonel?" asked Captain Rodriguez. Sarah had given this considerable thought during the night. "We'll coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies to share our intelligence and support their investigation. We'll also implement new communication security protocols to prevent future surveillance attempts." The meeting continued for another hour, with Sarah outlining specific responsibilities for each department. Her detailed planning and clear communication demonstrated the leadership skills that had earned her the promotion to colonel. As officers filed out of the conference room, Major Collins approached Sarah privately. "Colonel, I want to acknowledge that your handling of this situation was effective. I may have been too quick to recommend escalation." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "Major, your caution was appropriate given the initial uncertainty about what we were facing. Good commanders consider multiple perspectives before making decisions." This exchange marked a turning point in their working relationship, with Collins beginning to trust Sarah's judgment in critical situations. Word of this conversation spread among the senior staff, further solidifying Sarah's position as an effective leader. The successful resolution of the security crisis had a significant impact throughout the base. Soldiers who had initially been skeptical about serving under a female commander began to recognize her competence and decision-making abilities. Conversations in the mess hall and barracks reflected growing respect for their new commanding officer. Sergeant Thompson, the guard who had initially challenged Sarah's entry to the base, found himself defending her leadership to soldiers who still harbored doubts. "I was wrong about the colonel," he told his squad during their weekly briefing. "She handled that security situation better than any commander I've served under." The transformation in base morale was noticeable as Sarah continued her regular interactions with personnel at all levels. Her morning runs through the base became opportunities for informal conversations with soldiers, and her presence at evening formations demonstrated her commitment to understanding their daily challenges. Private Johnson, who had questioned Sarah during her first lunch at the base, now spoke enthusiastically about her leadership style. "The colonel actually listens when we talk to her," he told other soldiers. "She doesn't just give orders and walk away." These positive changes created momentum that helped Sarah implement several improvements she had identified during her first month of command. Communication protocols were updated to enhance security while maintaining operational efficiency. Training programs were expanded to include scenarios based on the recent security incident. Equipment maintenance schedules were optimized to improve readiness rates. Each change was introduced through consultation with the affected departments, reflecting Sarah's commitment to collaborative leadership. This approach earned support from personnel who might have resisted directives imposed without their input. Sergeant Major Williams became one of Sarah's strongest supporters, often citing her technical knowledge and practical approach to problem solving. "The colonel knows her business," he would tell visitors to the motor pool. "She asks the right questions and supports our efforts to maintain peak performance." The communications department experienced similar improvements under Sarah's leadership. Technical Sergeant Lopez worked with her to implement new security measures that protected sensitive information while improving operational communications. Their collaboration resulted in protocols that were adopted by other bases in the region. As Sarah's second month of command began, Fort Blackwater was operating at higher efficiency levels than it had achieved in years. Personnel retention rates improved as soldiers gained confidence in their leadership. Training scores increased as new programs challenged troops to develop advanced skills. Equipment readiness rates reached record levels as maintenance procedures were streamlined. The success of Sarah's command began attracting attention from division headquarters, with senior officers requesting briefings on the improvements achieved at Fort Blackwater. General Harrison, who had approved Sarah's appointment, visited the base to observe operations firsthand. During his visit, General Harrison spoke privately with several officers and enlisted personnel about their experiences under Sarah's command. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with personnel praising her leadership style, technical competence, and commitment to their welfare. Colonel Martinez has transformed this base, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes told the general. She's maintained all of our traditional strengths while implementing improvements that have enhanced our capabilities. Major Collins, who had initially questioned Sarah's appointment, provided equally strong endorsement of her performance. The colonel has proven that effective leadership transcends traditional expectations. She's earned the respect and loyalty of everyone on this base. Sergeant Thompson requested a meeting with General Harrison to discuss his initial reaction to Sarah's arrival. "Sir, I made a mistake when the colonel first arrived, but she handled it with professionalism that taught me an important lesson about judging people by their credentials rather than their appearance." These conversations confirmed General Harrison's confidence in his decision to appoint Sarah as commander of Fort Blackwater. The base was not only maintaining its high standards but exceeding them under her leadership. 6 months after Sarah's appointment, Fort Blackwater faced its ultimate test when a natural disaster struck the region, requiring massive coordination between military and civilian authorities. This crisis would prove whether Sarah's leadership could handle the most challenging circumstances possible. The emergency began at 3 a.m. when earthquake monitoring stations detected seismic activity 40 miles northeast of the base. Initial reports suggested a magnitude 6.8 earthquake centered near the town of Millbrook, a community of 12,000 people that relied heavily on tourism and agriculture. Sarah was awakened by the emergency notification system and immediately reported to the command center. The base's communication systems were already buzzing with reports from various agencies, paintbrush a picture of widespread damage and potential casualties in the affected area. Captain Rodriguez had taken charge of initial response coordination, establishing communication links with emergency management agencies and monitoring news reports from the disaster zone. When Sarah arrived, he briefed her on the developing situation and the requests for military assistance that were already coming in. "Colonel, we're receiving reports of collapsed buildings, severed communication lines, and blocked roadways throughout the affected area," Rodriguez reported. "The State Emergency Management Agency is requesting immediate assistance with search and rescue operations." Sarah reviewed the incoming information while mentally calculating the resources available at Fort Blackwater. The base had equipment and personnel trained for disaster response, but coordinating such a large operation would test every system and procedure they had developed. Major Collins arrived within minutes, having anticipated that the earthquake would trigger military response protocols. Despite their early disagreements, he had become one of Sarah's most reliable officers, and she knew she could count on his operational expertise during this crisis. "Major, I need you to coordinate with our logistics department and prepare our heavy equipment for immediate deployment," Sarah instructed. "We'll need our engineering units ready for search and rescue operations within 2 hours." The command center transformed into a hub of controlled activity as officers and enlisted personnel worked to implement Sarah's emergency response plan. Communication specialists established links with civilian emergency agencies, transportation officers organized convoys of emergency equipment, and medical personnel prepared to deploy field hospitals. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes took charge of medical response preparations, working with her staff to organize supplies and personnel for potential mass casualty situations. Her experience during overseas deployments proved invaluable as she anticipated the types of injuries they might encounter. "Colonel, our medical teams can be ready for deployment within 90 minutes, Barnes reported. "We're prepared to establish 2 field hospitals with surgical capabilities if needed." Sarah's decision-making during the first hours of the crisis demonstrated the leadership skills she had developed throughout her military career. She balanced the need for rapid response with careful coordination, ensuring that Fort Blackwater's assistance would be effective rather than merely well-intentioned. Sergeant Major Williams supervised the preparation of heavy equipment, including bulldozers, cranes, and specialized vehicles designed for emergency response. His team worked with remarkable efficiency, reflecting the high standards that had become characteristic of all base operations under Sarah's command. As the first convoy prepared to depart for the disaster zone, Sarah addressed the assembled personnel. "You represent Fort Blackwater and the United States military in this operation," she told them. "Your professionalism and competence will make a difference in the lives of people who need our help." The troops responded with enthusiasm that reflected their confidence in their commanding officer and their pride in their unit's capabilities. Months of effective leadership had created a culture of excellence that prepared them for exactly this type of challenging mission. The initial deployment included engineering teams equipped for search and rescue operations, medical personnel with field hospital equipment, and communication specialists who would coordinate between military and civilian agencies. Additional resources remained on standby at Fort Blackwater, ready for deployment as needed. Sarah established a forward command post near Millbrook to oversee military operations while maintaining communication with base headquarters. This decision demonstrated her hands-on leadership style and her commitment to understanding situations firsthand rather than managing them from a distance. The disaster zone presented a sobering scene of destruction. Buildings had collapsed throughout the town's historic district, roads were cracked and blocked with debris, and power lines lay scattered across residential areas. Emergency sirens echoed through the morning air as first responders worked to locate survivors. Sarah's first priority was establishing effective coordination with civilian emergency management officials. She met with County Emergency Management Director Patricia Walsh, a veteran emergency coordinator who had managed disaster responses throughout the region for 15 years. "Colonel, we're grateful for military support," Walsh said as they reviewed priority areas for search and rescue operations. "Our local resources are overwhelmed, and we need the heavy equipment and specialized personnel you can provide." The meeting established clear protocols for military involvement in the disaster response, with civilian authorities maintaining overall command while military units provided specific capabilities under Sarah's coordination. This arrangement reflected Sarah's understanding of civilian-military cooperation during emergency situations. Engineering teams from Fort Blackwater immediately began working in the most heavily damaged areas of Millbrook, using specialized equipment to remove debris and search for survivors. Their training and equipment proved essential for accessing collapsed buildings where conventional rescue teams couldn't operate effectively. Sergeant Peterson, who had led the security patrol during the surveillance incident months earlier, now commanded an engineering team searching through the remains of Millbrook's community center. His team worked methodically through the rubble, using sensitive detection equipment to locate potential survivors. "Command, we have contact with survivors in the community center collapse," Peterson radioed to Sarah's forward command post. "We need medical personnel and additional equipment for extraction." Within minutes, medical teams and additional engineering equipment were moving toward the community center site. The coordination demonstrated the effectiveness of the procedures Sarah had implemented during her months of command at Fort Blackwater. Dr. Lisa Chen, a civilian emergency room physician working alongside Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, was impressed by the military medical team's capabilities and organization. "Your personnel are exceptional," she told Barnes during a brief break between patients. "Their training and equipment are making a significant difference." The field hospitals established by Fort Blackwater's medical units provided critical care capabilities that local hospitals couldn't maintain due to earthquake damage. Emergency generators powered sophisticated medical equipment while military communications systems maintained contact with regional medical centers. As the first day of operations continued, Sarah's forward command post became a coordination hub for increasingly complex rescue operations. Multiple agencies were working throughout the disaster zone, and effective communication was essential to prevent duplication of effort and ensure that resources were deployed where they were needed most. Captain Rodriguez managed communication links between military units, civilian agencies, and regional emergency management centers. His work ensured that information flowed effectively throughout the operation, allowing commanders to make informed decisions about resource allocation. "Colonel, we're receiving requests for assistance from 3 additional communities that were affected by aftershocks," Rodriguez reported. "Their damage is less severe than Millbrook, but they need help with emergency communications and medical support." Sarah evaluated these requests while considering the resources available from Fort Blackwater and the ongoing operations in Millbrook. Her decision to expand military assistance to the additional communities demonstrated her understanding of the broader regional impact of the disaster. Additional units were deployed from Fort Blackwater to provide communication support and medical assistance to the outlying communities. These deployments stretched the base's resources but reflected Sarah's commitment to helping all affected populations. Major Collins coordinated the expanded operations from Fort Blackwater, ensuring that deployed units had the support they needed while maintaining base security and essential functions. His management of this complex logistical challenge earned praise from division headquarters. By the end of the second day, military units from Fort Blackwater had rescued 47 survivors from collapsed buildings, treated over 200 injured civilians, and restored communication links to dozens of isolated areas. Their performance exceeded all expectations and earned recognition from state and federal emergency management agencies. Governor Rebecca Martinez, no relation to Sarah, visited the disaster zone to observe response operations and meet with military and civilian officials coordinating the effort. Her conversation with Sarah highlighted the effectiveness of Fort Blackwater's contribution to the disaster response. "Colonel, your base's response has been exceptional," the governor said during their meeting. "The coordination between your personnel and civilian agencies has been seamless, and the results speak for themselves." Sarah emphasized that the success reflected the capabilities of all Fort Blackwater personnel rather than individual leadership. "Governor, these results demonstrate the quality of training and dedication that characterize everyone at our base. I'm proud to command such outstanding soldiers." Media coverage of the disaster response brought national attention to Fort Blackwater's performance, with news reports highlighting the effectiveness of military-civilian cooperation during the emergency. Sarah found herself representing not only her base but the military's commitment to supporting civilian communities during crises. Television interviews and newspaper articles featured quotes from civilians who had been helped by Fort Blackwater personnel, creating positive public awareness of the base's capabilities and Sarah's leadership. These stories contrasted sharply with the initial skepticism that had greeted her appointment months earlier. "The colonel's soldiers saved my daughter's life," said Maria Santos, whose child had been trapped in a collapsed school building. "They worked for 6 hours to reach her, and they never gave up. I'll never forget what they did for our family." Such testimonials reflected the personal impact of Sarah's emphasis on excellence and dedication throughout her command. The values she had instilled in Fort Blackwater personnel were demonstrated through their performance during the most challenging circumstances possible. As recovery operations entered their second week, Sarah began transitioning military support from emergency response to reconstruction assistance. Engineering units helped repair critical infrastructure while communication specialists worked with civilian agencies to restore normal services. The transition required careful coordination to ensure that military assistance complemented civilian recovery efforts without creating dependency. Sarah worked closely with local officials to identify areas where continued military support would be most beneficial. Sergeant Major Williams supervised Fort Blackwater personnel as they helped repair damaged roads and bridges, using military engineering expertise to restore transportation links essential for long-term recovery. His teams worked alongside civilian contractors, sharing knowledge and resources. "This is what military service is about," Williams told his crews as they worked to repair a damaged bridge connecting Millbrook to surrounding agricultural areas. "We train for combat, but we serve our country by helping people in any way we can." The reconstruction phase lasted another month, with Fort Blackwater providing ongoing support as communities worked to rebuild. Sarah's management of this extended operation demonstrated her understanding of the complex relationship between military capabilities and civilian needs. When military support operations finally concluded, Sarah hosted a ceremony at Fort Blackwater to recognize personnel who had participated in the disaster response. Representatives from affected communities attended the ceremony, providing public recognition of the base's contribution. County Emergency Management Director Walsh spoke at the ceremony about the impact of Fort Blackwater's assistance. Colonel Martinez and her personnel set a standard for military-civilian cooperation that will serve as a model for future emergency responses, she said. The disaster response became a defining moment for Sarah's command and for Fort Blackwater's reputation within the military community. Division headquarters cited the operation as an example of effective leadership and unit performance, and Sarah was promoted to full colonel ahead of the normal timeline. More importantly, the crisis had proven that the changes Sarah had implemented at Fort Blackwater created genuine improvements in the base's capabilities. Personnel who had initially been skeptical about her leadership now spoke with pride about serving under her command. Private Johnson, who had questioned Sarah during her first lunch at the base, now served as a squad leader and frequently spoke about lessons learned from her leadership example. "The colonel showed us that being professional and caring about people makes you stronger, not weaker," he explained to new soldiers. Sergeant Thompson, whose initial reaction to Sarah's arrival had created the incident that gave this story its title, became an informal spokesperson for the changes that had occurred at Fort Blackwater. His transformation from skeptic to supporter symbolized the broader evolution of attitudes throughout the base. "I learned not to judge people by what I expected to see," Thompson would tell visitors to the base. Colonel Martinez proved that leadership comes from competence, character, and commitment to the people you serve. The success of Sarah's command at Fort Blackwater influenced personnel policies throughout the military, with her leadership methods being studied and implemented at other installations. Her approach to building trust, maintaining standards, and developing personnel became a model for effective command. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to general and took command of an entire division, personnel throughout the military knew her reputation for excellence and dedication. The woman who had once been challenged at Fort Blackwater's gate had become one of the most respected leaders in the armed forces. The story of her first days at Fort Blackwater became part of military leadership education, illustrating how effective commanders overcome initial skepticism through consistent demonstration of competence and character. Future officers learned from her example that true leadership transcends traditional expectations and creates lasting positive change. Fort Blackwater itself became known throughout the military as a model installation, with its performance standards and unit culture serving as examples for other bases. The transformation that began with Sarah's arrival continued long after her departure, proving that effective leadership creates enduring improvements that benefit everyone involved.